Yes.
Okay, here we go. It says the webinar is now broadcasting, so we should get more patriots.
People are coming in.
Okay.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We will start in just about a minute or so.
Yeah, it's like watching the participants go up, Heather. It's like
people rushing in the room.
Watching the telethon or something. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us, and we will begin in just a minute or so when everybody's able to get in.
Thanks, Jane, for letting us know you can hear and see us.
Great.
You're welcome, Antonio.
Thank you all for joining us, and we'll start in just a few moments as everyone gathers together. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar. And also, I just want to take a moment to thank you for what I know you're doing in your local communities to help them get through this very difficult time of COVID-19. So thank you to the churches and all our faith communities who are stepping out to help everyone else. Today, we'll be discussing the PPP loan and loan forgiveness specifically. There's a few details that we'll cover with you, and then we'll be able to take some time to answer your questions. Just to acclimate you to Zoom, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and if it's not there, you might have to just move your mouse there. You'll see an area that says chat, and you can click on that and open the chat screen. If you'll do that now, we'd love to know who's with us. So if you'll share your name, your faith community's name, and your city or town, we'd love to know that you're joining us today. Also, we hope to be able to address most of your questions as we go through the webinar. So you'll also see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A. And so if you will click on that when you have a question, you can type your questions in, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll make time to go through those questions and respond and answer. This webinar will be recorded, and so if someone who is not here from your church needs to see this, we will send that recording to your email probably in a day or two once we're able to upload it. I'd like to introduce our webinar speaker, Dan Garlock. Dan has been very generous in helping us through the complicated details of the PPP loan process, and he has volunteered to help us today and help us to understand the loan forgiveness part of it so we can make sure everyone gets that step finished. Dan is the owner of Dan Garlock LLC, and he has extensive experience leading in the education, philanthropic, government, and education sectors, including 25 years with the Governor's Office, the president of a $1 billion foundation, the founding director of a public policy research organization, and the interim leader of a research university. He is also active in his local church, and he has a real heart to help other churches to make sure that they know how to navigate through this difficult time, and if they have applied for the PPP, get all that information straight. And now that we've come to the point where you can ask for forgiveness, to make sure everyone gets that application straight. So thank you, Dan, for everything you've done, and thank you for being with us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Well, great. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a late Thursday afternoon, a kind of warm day. I wish I were in the mountains. I am not. I am here in Raleigh, my home office. The mountains make me think a little bit cooler. I hope you all are well, no matter where you are. I mean, since we've talked, we've had Pentecost And so that was a day that I was finally able to go back to church in person, outdoor service, and I was grateful for that. I know that's been a great tonic blessing for those of us who have been able to do so. And thank you for all of you out there who are faith community leaders for the creative ways that you've helped help the faithful remain connected to this. I used to be chair of my church's finance council, and so my successor there has been releasing things on the collection plate that have been a little challenging. So we'll see how it goes. I wanted to just kind of talk about the fact that now it's time. I mean, last time we chatted, a lot of our organizations decided to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. There have been numerous changes to the program since we started that, but not all to bad. I mean, some actually could be very helpful to us to get forgiveness. In this case, we mean forgiveness means we don't have to pay back the money we borrowed from our local financial institution. So that's helpful. So I just wanted to, let's see if I can share the screen here and talk a little bit about what you'll have to go through in case maybe some of you started this. Now, the first loans went out under this program on or about April 12th, April 13th, somewhere around there, around Eastertide and Easter time. And so the first 8 weeks for that program ended about June 8th. That was when people started being able to apply for forgiveness. Now, this is a form that you have before you. If you see this, see at the top of it where it says EZ. See where my cursor is? It says EZ. So this applies to you if you well, let me say if you have an application through your business, if you're a sole proprietor or independent contractor, you can use this form. Or you can use this form if you have not reduced the hours of your employees. Okay, you not reduce the hours of your employees. If you have not cut the wages of your employees by more than 25%, and if you still have the same number of employees. So I'm presuming that most of us, the goal of our program was able to have enough resources to maintain the number of our employees that we had beginning in January, the wages we were paying them, and the hours for which they're being compensated. If those are true, you can use this form. There's also some ways to also use this form if you were not able to do those things, but the state government or the authority, maybe a municipality, shut you down and said you couldn't operate. You can also use this form. But in any case, there's another form you can use even if none of those things happen, but I just thought it'd be easier to use the simple form here. So I think the top part of this, I'm just going to walk you through it. And so the top part of it just talks about the basic, information that you would have from your loan application. I'll pull that back out and just put it down, same as if you had it. Your legal name of your church, from most of your church, your address, your EIN, your phone number, who's to contact, etc. Right? And whoever was to contact on this. So the SBA PPP loan number, when you went to your bank or your community development financial institution, whoever lent you the money, you should have been giving on that time. It will say right on the materials, the SBA PPP loan number. And so that's what you put there. So go pull out the loan document that you signed, probably signed it 4 or 5 times, and go get that out. And so that's what you fill in there. The lender PPP loan number, of course, you have to talk to your lender about it, but the lender is the agent by which you're getting the forgiveness, right? So if you have a question, you call them and say, look, I want to put in my application for forgiveness. How do I do it? In some cases, your financial institution may have, like the one I work with most regularly, had its own spreadsheet. They had a contract with the local CPA firm to help handle this for them, and they had their own kind of spreadsheet to help calculate all this. But in any case, so use that. Check with, okay, so step number 1, check with your lender, see if they have anything beyond this application that they want you to do, okay? So that's what you talk about. The PPP loan amount is, you know what that is. That's how much you borrowed. And the loan disbursement date, very important here, because what they will do is count from 8 weeks or 24 weeks, but so for most of us, it's 8 weeks since that date. So that was the date at which the loan money hit your bank account. In other words, for instance, I had a client who signed it on April 12th, got the money on the 13th. It's the 13th, a Monday. Then 8 weeks from that is Sunday, I believe it was Sunday the 8th. So it goes, if you count up 8 weeks, it's 56 days. So if you were to hand count it, if you borrowed it on a Monday, it's going to end up about 8 weeks at the Sunday or so, just to give you a sense of that. The employees at the time of loan application and forgiveness application should be the same. Hopefully, maybe if forgiveness, if it's greater, that's no problem. So that's just to make sure you didn't cut employees. Now the EIDL advance amount. When we talked about this, when I did the seminar, there's a lot of uncertainty in the SBA that administers the economic injury disaster loan, the EIDL program, EIDL, changed their minds, right? At that point in time, they said it looked like you could get up to $10,000 in an advance from them and not have to pay it back. Well, it turns out, they said, no, we don't have enough money to go around, so we're going to make it $1,000 per employee. So if you're a church and you're the pastor and you're the only employee, and you applied for the EIDL, said, man, I'd like to apply for however much, but they might have advanced you $1,000, and you have to put the EIDL application number on that too. That amount, generally speaking, and I know we've had a question about that, generally speaking, will be subtracted from your forgiveness amount. So say you got a loan amount of $20,000, and EIDL, they also sent you $1,000. So basically they said, well, we'll forgive you $19,000. Now, some of you, I already anticipate the question. Some of you I talked to directly. There's a possibility to use the EIDL for, maybe something that the PPP didn't cover, and to segregate it as best you can, that would be appropriate. Now, if you took out a loan through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, in addition to the advance, they don't care about that amount here. What they're asking about is how much did the SBA wire you, send to your bank account, because they don't want you to double dip. All right. And so if you have any questions about that, you should talk to your bank and say, oh, look, I used my, I had to use up all my PPP loan for salaries and for the housing allowance and so forth. But I used this EIDL, this $1,000 or whatever, for a month of health insurance. That might be a way to work it, but just know that they're worried about double dipping there. And I know a lot of us applied for the EIDL and then didn't hear anything back. So we thought, okay, it's lost in the government, so I'll go ahead and apply for the PPP. And all of a sudden the EIDL, you start getting communications from them. So I understand how that works. And in the federal government, I've talked to key officials, not going to tell you who, but they said they understand that has been an issue and they're going to try to work that out. For most cases, it's such a small amount. The amounts we talked about were so small that we didn't have to worry about it. All right. The payroll schedule. So this is just, the payroll schedule is important because it could be, well, maybe what happens if you take a loan out at exactly the wrong time and maybe you just missed a payday. So you didn't get kind of 8 weeks worth of paydays in. How can you adjust that? So if you have a weekly or biweekly payroll, you may want to adjust it just to make sure. The covered period here is, and I'll get to that alternative payroll covered period. The payroll covered period is generally 8 weeks or 24 weeks. So let's use 8 weeks. So again, like here, I typed in for my customer April 13th to June 8th. All right, so it's whatever the 56 days is there. If you have enough money to get the forgiveness in that time, eligible expenses. The alternative payroll covered period allows you to go, okay, we're going to start this instead of starting it on the day I borrowed the money hit my account. I'm going to start in the nearest period, on the nearest period after that date when I had a payroll, when my payroll period started. So if you have a question about that, you could talk to me, but that gives you a little flexibility. And the 8 weeks could start, have a little grace on that. Who doesn't want grace, right? So there you go. The borrower, if you receive PPP loans in excess of $2 million, I don't know why you're on this call, but basically if you did, all that means is you're going to have to go through a lot more examination by the federal government to make sure that you really needed the money. Basically, there's a whole lot of controversy about this in the middle of May over accusations that entities took this that didn't really need the money, and the feds were going to come after you. But the Fed said, look, if you got a loan under $2 million and you said you had enough uncertainty that you needed the loan, we're just going to take your word for it. All right. So that gets us to the fun part, which is the forgiveness amount calculation. Now, when we started this exercise, payroll costs. What are payroll costs? Payroll costs include the following. One, salaries and wages that you can take over up to $100,000 annual salary. So in other words, if you take the 8-week payroll period and you get paid $200,000, and so that would work out to be whatever it is, but say, 30-some thousand dollars within a couple weeks, within a couple months. So sorry, you can only take a capped amount here for salaries and benefits of $15,380. That's a cap. It'll show you in instructions, but it's $15,380. All right, and that's the maximum per employee. Most of you this doesn't apply to. You just use whatever your payroll costs were over that 8-week or 24-week period. Business mortgage interest payment. Okay, what else is included in there? Well, if you as the church paid for your, paid to the conference or paid whoever for the, in that 8-week period, you paid for health insurance premiums for you or your employees, you include that. If you contributed into the pension fund, most of your UMC churches, if you paid into the conference, if you have a pension plan or retirement plan or something like that, you include that. If you have unemployment insurance taxes, state unemployment insurance taxes, you include that. What you don't include in that line is if you pay the employer share of payroll taxes. In other words, if you're a taxpayer where you're paying Social Security taxes to somebody and you withhold the amount from their paycheck, from their hourly rate, and you pay matching amount, you don't get to claim the matching amount. So in other words, we're talking about salaries paid to the employees, including the withholding you have for federal and state taxes because it's their money, whatever is due to them in some way, shape, or form. You include the health insurance premium and the retirement benefits such as a contribution to a pension or 401k or what have you, 403b or what have you. The business mortgage insurance interest payments, most of you who I worked with did not have any line 2 or 3 mortgage interest or rent or lease payments, but if you did, you should include that. Now notice on the mortgage, if you're paying off a mortgage still, it's only the interest part of that. It is not the principal part of that. So you would have to look at that and break that off, all right? So up to 8 weeks of that. Utility payments, that could include anything, your water, your sewer, your cable, your internet, I mean, whatever, what have you, whatever else is generally included as a utility. Somebody asked me about garbage pickup, that I think is iffy, but those are the types of things that you do include in utility payments. This is all in the 8-week periods, all right? So if you add those things all up, and you get to line 5, and you add those things all up, and that's greater than line 6, how much you borrowed, cool, that's a good sign. And then you say, okay, what is the payroll cost 60% requirement? In other words, what the rule was to begin with when we all borrowed for this money, and say we borrowed before June 5th, I'm going to assume most of you borrowed before June 5th. If you borrowed before June 5th, well, you were told, well, look, it's going to be 75% of the forgivable amount that you borrow is going to have to go towards payroll. And then the Fed said, okay, we're going to give you a little grace and only make it 60% because there are some areas where, the rent and utilities and the mortgage interest is higher. And so they kind of said, okay, we're just going to make it 60%. And so this line just guarantees you that you're no more than 60% of the total forgiveness amount is going to be due to payroll. That has to be at least 60% of pay. Excuse me, I said it backwards. At least 60% has to be due to payroll costs. So that's just a math issue. All right. And then what happens is what we should hope is that the smallest of line 5, 6, and 7, and what we're rooting for it to be is line 6, you enter that amount. So what we want is line 6, the PPP loan amount, and line 8, the forgiveness amount, to be the same. So in other words, you will apply to your bank and say, here's my application, here's whatever backup, and we'll go from there. So what kind of backup will they want? Because they're just not going to take your word for it, even though you're men and women of the Lord and everything else. But they're going to want to see payroll costs. So if you use a payroll provider, such as a Gusto or if you do it through QuickBooks or something like that, they're going to want to see a journal that showed that money is actually being paid. If they show a contribution to Blue Cross Blue Shield or whoever it is covers your health insurance, they're going to want to see a check or some kind of sign of payment for that. If it's a contribution to a retirement plan, okay, you've written it to the conference's pension plan or written check or something like that, you show evidence of that. But they're going to want to see some evidence that these amounts have actually been paid. Right? The same thing with the interest and the lease payments and the utility payments. They're going to want to see, okay, what date were they entered? What day were you, when did you write a check for them? And show your canceled checks if you can and so forth for that period. So that's the type of thing. But your bank will have evidence on what not evidence. They will tell you what they need for that. And then here we go is the certifications, and you just have to sign the certifications, and it's basically the same type of certifications that you signed when you took the loan. I don't think any of these are an issue, but you're not getting squirrely on this. You used it for the purposes of payroll, mortgage or rent, and utilities. You didn't go above a certain amount for individual, 15,385 if you use 8 weeks. 24 weeks might be 20,833 per individual. Again, most of you don't, that doesn't apply to you because you're not making salaries of over $100,000. And then, you didn't do all these things. One, you didn't use it for things other than that. You didn't cut salaries for employees. You didn't, you verified it. You made sure that when you asked for this, that this is real, this is just not made up. You provided documentation. I'm not a lying weasel. The tax, if you go and you look at my taxes and my tax forms when I file them, they're not going to be different than that. And I understand that people can, that they may ask me for more information. But you have to say, one is you didn't reduce the number of employees or the average hours of these employees. And if somebody said, look, I'm coming back, I'm not coming back, I'm 70 years old, diabetic, I got all these conditions, I'm not coming back, you could try to hire somebody, right? And if they say, well, you can't, if you try to restore and it will refuse, you have to get documentation for that. Let me know if that's an issue. The second thing is or if you're unable to operate between February 15th and the end of the period at the same level because you're complying with requirements, right? So I don't know, an example of this might be they tell you, they have the apocryphal story of the choir where everybody got it when they're practicing. And so you say, okay, we're toning down on the singing. And so the music minister is no longer there. I'm not against that, I'm pro music, but I'm just saying that could be such a thing where you might be able to get a waiver on that. But what we're presuming, and most of the people who I dealt with said that they were going to keep their people on at the same level, pay them the same amount, same number of hours. And if that's all true, we're in good shape. They also have a demographic form here to kind of track that. The interesting part on that is you'll notice that a lot of the governmental entities, including most notably, I think Governor Cooper, has been wanting to make sure that businesses that have been historically disadvantaged, maybe they're owned by people of color, maybe they're women-owned, maybe they're veteran-owned, what have you, get their fair share of some of these programs. Well, the real problem there, just to tell you, is, we'll take this off sharing. The real problem, just to tell you, is that really for people of color, for women, for veterans, that the ownership of businesses is not commensurate. So in other words, we might have 6% of the businesses with employees in the state of North Carolina are owned by African Americans. 20%. The population of our state of African American is over 22%. So it's, that is, if you want to create a business owner population that looks more like North Carolina, we got a lot of work to do. But they want to track that because they want to find out what's going on. So that's what I got. I see we got some questions in there. We can move on from there.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And we've gotten some good questions here. The first one is from Ross and Samantha about seasonal employees. So if you always lay off your preschool teachers over the summer, how does that affect? You paid them through May and then they never work in June.
Well, see, this is interesting because usually the question is they're looking at people where they hire in June, they hire for the summer things. So I think there's a part of this where you describe the seasonality of it. And then it does recognize that you can choose an alternative period when you look back, because they want to say is, how does your employment compare to what it was in a normal period, right? So if you say, okay, now we have 30 people on the payroll, and now we've only got 20 people on the payroll, but that usually happens. They're not going to penalize you before that. What I don't know, and there are limits here. By the way, this is for informational services. I am not your lawyer. I am not your tax advisor. I am not your accountant. All right, so you can't sue me, but you won't get anything. So I'm just disclosing all that this is for informational purposes anyway. I would check on that. We might be able to go back and do a little research of that, Ross. Now, if you claim the salaries as part of the loan and you're not paying the salaries afterwards, we'd have to do a little more research on that. So if you didn't include the salaries of those seasonal employees, it might be a little bit easier. We'll figure that out later.
Very good. And this is a good question because it took a while for the SBA to decide this one. What about the housing allowance and the utility allowance that's paid to the minister?
Yeah, sorry, I should have covered that. The housing allowance is counted. I think the interpretation of that is housing and utility allowances are counted as part of salary. So in other words, if you get, I don't know, $50,000 in salary, and then you get $1,000 a month for, I'm making up a number. If that's ridiculous, don't get mad. $1,000 a month for housing allowance, that's included as something that if you included it, that's an eligible expense if you maintain it.
Would you count the lease of office equipment in the lease line item?
No, I think the lease, what they're getting at there is lease of real property. That is a good question, but I think the lease, what they're trying to get to is they're trying to get to mortgage interest or rent or lease. So no, I think it's about of a facility. It's not or a room or what have you. It's not a shared office, whatever. It's not about personal property. Or it's not about business property like that.
And this person's trying to make sure you're on your toes. Can you explain the covered period versus the alternative payroll covered period?
Yes, so I can. All right, so normally the covered period is 8 weeks or 24 weeks. All right, let me take some time to explain this. So the 24 weeks gives you a little more time to get people back on payroll, perhaps if you weren't able to bring them back because this thing has hung around longer than people thought. People thought when it turns 90 in the summer, it'll go away. It has not. Maybe this time when we were all locked up would knock it out. Clearly it's not. So I would say that, Samantha, I think it's more, I see what you say about real personal property. I would think it's going to be more about real property when they look at it. But as I said, this is based on what I think their general thought was there. So if you don't have to use that, I wouldn't, because otherwise you're going to get questions. But if you need it to make your loan work, and if the bank, when they examined it, thought it was okay, that might be something to talk to them. But generally, that was not the intent. It might have been there. Okay, back to this point. So the 8 weeks to 24 weeks. The 24-week period gives you more time that if you weren't able to get your eligible expenses or weren't able to get everybody back to work, it allows you a little bit longer time to get to those expenses, to spend them. Because some businesses didn't get to come back. And if you're a gym, for example, I mean, where are you in North Carolina? I mean, you thought you'd be back, and then all of a sudden you're not back. And you're not going to be back by June 30th. And so this gives grace and allows you to choose between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. Now, the question that the banks are wrestling with, which they don't know, is say, okay, maybe it didn't take me 8 weeks to get there, but maybe it took me 12. Can I apply now? And nobody knows. Right now, the choice is binary. You can look at 8 weeks or 24 weeks. But the question is, if you use the 24 weeks, do you have to wait till the end of that 24 weeks to apply, which would set us at a time when basically then the loan, we got 6 months before on the loan, we'd have to start paying the loan back. All right, so back to the question. Is the alternative period says that if you took out a loan, when does your next pay period start? And you could start it on that day and then go forward to make sure you get it in if you have a weekly payroll or a bi-weekly payroll. All right, so say you started it, you get paid on Friday and you got the loan amount, I'm just making it up, on a Saturday, and that caused you to miss that period. Well, if you started it on, when the pay period starts, it might work out for you. Just do the math. I don't think most of us are going to have to do the alternative period, but you can't use it if it's twice a month or monthly. You can use it if it's weekly or bi-weekly. But it's the same number of days. It's just when those days starts, and it just helps you move it.
Betty asks, since the formula for the loan amount was 2.5 average monthly payroll, can you use the entire amount for wages?
Yes.
Even though the money will last longer than 8 weeks?
Yes.
Is there a time is there a deadline for applying for forgiveness after the 8 weeks?
Well, the deadline one is that, remember, like, let me start and answer a different question. So one is when this program will start released, everybody went out and borrowed, they ran out of money. And then Congress had to put more money into it. And then they kind of scared some people off from it. But now they don't, here it's by June 30th and you don't have it. I believe it's by October. Let me get back to you on that. I think it's October, the end of the year. Mm-hmm. But it has to be some period of time. They have to give some grace. It's certainly by December 31st would be my guess, because the program ends June 30th. You can't apply after June 30th, and you only have 24 weeks to do it. So that's the max.
Yeah, so it's wise as soon as your 8 weeks is up to just go ahead.
If you are confident that you have got enough money in there to get forgiveness, I would go sooner rather than later, because then you have to send it into the bank, and then the bank might have questions. But maybe the bank doesn't have questions. They send it to the Fed, and the Feds don't. Any of us who waited for the EIDL understand how this goes. Then maybe the Feds look at it. It takes forever, and all of a sudden you're waiting for this to happen, right? And what some of us I'm nervous about is that they juke around long enough that all of a sudden now the bank says, oh, by the way, it's been 6 months, you have to start paying on this loan. And it's a hot mess. The bank doesn't want it, you don't want it, nobody wants it. So.
Right. Yeah. I'll just add here that there is loan money still available.
Correct.
And I see that most people on this webinar are United Methodist. And so the United Methodist Credit Union in Virginia is offering the PPP loans. And so if you're United Methodist and you have not gotten a loan, their website is TUMCU, the United Methodist Credit Union.org. So that's one resource for you.
Yeah, now look, if you're up in the mountains too, Mountain Biz Works has been
Yes.
we've got a couple through there, and if you run a problem there, you talk to Mr. Dan here. We'll straighten that out. June 30th.
So going back to the preschool teachers, if we included the preschool teachers on the original application,
yeah.
But we could cover a loan amount with the salaries of the rest of the church staff using the 24-week period, do we need to include the preschool teachers in the forgiveness form number of employees?
See, that's a cause that people didn't think about, right? Because they thought about it the other way with summer employees. I'd like to research that and get back.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to,
Yeah. We can definitely send that
Thanks,
information out.
Samantha is killing it on the question. She gets the best questions.
And I'll add, go to your local bank, and also the lender can answer some of these questions specifically for you too.
Okay,
I'm
so
looking through.
I'm looking through Q&A too. So let me answer this. If the idle advance, when they send $10,000, then all of a sudden they added $10,000 to it that was deposited in the account. I don't know about that, but I think it depends on if you got that amount as an advance, but you didn't sign any loan document. It's whatever amount you got without signing the loan document, right? For clients of mine, they were hoping to get 10,000, they got 1,000 because they're a single employee, and so that's the amount that we put in. But it is however much was advanced to you without you signing on. If you took an idle loan and a PPP loan, we'll work with you later. That's more complicated.
What if they don't use the loan funds? Can they give them back?
No. Okay, so there was a time in May when the federal government was worried about everybody, the accusations that a lot of you saw about the publicly traded companies and so forth, the NBA got this, what does the NBA need this for, and so forth. And they were threatening to really get in this and say, now we're going to give you until the end of May. I believe it turned out to be May 18th, sometime in May, to say you could send it back without penalty. But now I think you should talk to your bank, but what's going to happen is you're going to have to pay accrued interest if you want to pay it back. In other words, if you didn't use it all up. The alternative is to go for the 24 weeks, right? It's 24 weeks, and maybe that would allow you to have enough time to use it up.
Yes.
So I would look into that.
Looking through here, do you see any other questions we didn't hit, or does anyone have a question that they want to type in? I want to let everyone know that I will email you from my email account. So if you have questions at a later date, you'll have my email that you can ask.
Yeah, I think there's a series of these on preschool teachers, yeah. Right? And I said we pay back to you. I don't know exactly what that means. And what I would like to do is that's a question I didn't contemplate, and I apologize for that. But I thought can we do some research and get back to you as quick as we can? How about that?
Right, and we have everyone's email, so we'll email out that question.
Yeah. Great. So let's see, somebody said an example of line 7.
That was the 60%.
Oh yeah, 60% requirement. So all that is that basically what has to happen there is that when you add up lines 1 through 4, that the payroll cost has to be most of it. It has to be over 60% of the forgivable amount. Or if you want to loan at 1% for 2 years, you can certainly just pay it back. But what they're saying there is that that's just a way to make sure that the total amount is that the payroll requirement is over 60%. Yeah, 60% is 60% of the amount borrowed in. Yes, it has to be at least that, and that's what it is. So, but the simplest thing to do is somebody asked, if you had enough payroll, if you had enough salaries to cover the loan, just do salaries. Don't worry about the rest of it. The easier you can make it on yourself. If you can use 100% of it for payroll, use 100% of it for payroll. Whatever it is. If you don't have to use the other lines, great, because then there's less documentation you have to provide and less chances for some bureaucrat. Look, used to be a bureaucrat, but somebody to ask a question.
So just to clarify, 60% isn't 60% of the amount borrowed.
No, ma'am. When you're asking for forgiveness, all they're saying is, okay, so say, I'll give you an example. Say you borrowed $10,000, and you probably borrowed more than that, but say you borrowed $10,000. What they're going to say is when you add up these lines, that hopefully lines 1 through 4, when your payroll, your mortgage, your rent, your utility, all those things equal at least $10,000. Then what they're going to say is, okay, say they added up to all those things added up to be $15,000, and you borrowed $10,000. So great. So you've used up more than that. But then they're going to look at your payroll line, and they're going to say, oh, out of that money, how much is 60% of it? So say out of the $15,000, that 12,000 of it is due to payroll. 12,000 out of the 15,000 that you actually spent is due to payroll. Then if you divide that by 0.6, they'll say, oh, well, line 7 would be 60, that 12,000 is actually 60% of 20,000, right? So the way I got that is just 12,000 divided by 0.6 gives you 20,000. So if you look at the forgiveness amount, said, okay, what were the total amounts you actually spent? 15,000. What was your PPP loan amount? Line 6, 10,000. And what your payroll cost? So in other words, what is your payroll cost is 60% of one number. In this case, it's 20,000. So you take the lesser one, the 10,000 is the amount you borrowed, and you get that forgiven. Now let's look at another way. Let's say, oh, out of this money, that 10,000 out of let's say 8,000 out of the 15,000 was for payroll. So 8,000. So you take 8,000, the other numbers still stick, divided by 0.6, and it says, oh, okay, don't worry about it because 8,000 is 60% of $13,333. Still under that. All they're telling you is that the payroll amount that you paid has to be at least 60% of the amount to be forgiven. Then that'd be 60% of the expenses, has to be 60% of the loan amount that you've been forgiven was spent on payroll.
And like Ann adds there, a lot of churches, the payroll is the vast majority.
Right.
So that makes it easier for them.
Right. A lot of, a lot of the payroll, the people I dealt with, in payroll, including the health insurance and retirement payments, if any, I would just remind them that a lot of places have been on, 100 years on the property. They don't have a mortgage. The utilities are a little bit, but not much. So.
And the form that you shared is also the same form for EIDL?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not. Now, there's no EIDL forgiveness, right? This is just, you've already got your loan, so you've already done all that paperwork. This is just if you want the loan to be forgiven. Now, if you just want to pay back the bank money, you write a check, you go ahead. But that's not what we want. We want you to get forgiven. Now, the idle money, if you got any advance amount directly deposited from 1,000 up to 10,000, depending on your number of employees, in your account, you don't have to pay that back. All right? Now, the federal government is going to work to make sure you're not double dipping using PPP and EIDL advance for the same thing. You can't use grant money for the same, can't pay twice for the same thing.
Right.
You can't collect money twice for the same thing, is what I'm going to say. And so that's that. But if you, on idle, if you got a loan that you signed a loan, you had to pay that money back. I mean, there's no forgiveness for that. The only part is that advance that you don't have to pay back, even if they turned you down for loan. And so what a lot of business people I worked with did is they might have gotten advance and they said, and then the SBA said, oh, great. Now here's some weeks later, here's how much you can borrow. And you're like, no, thanks, because I got my PPP.
So, yeah. The question's going back to the 24-week timeline versus the 8-week.
Yes.
Is it up to the church to decide which works best?
Yes. Yes. Look, but as you can tell, and again, I'm not your tax advisor, not your lawyer, not your accountant, not your preacher, but I would say that if you could do 8 week, people I work with, if you have enough in 8 weeks to get it done, let's get that paperwork in. Because the federal government's going to change its mind 100 times on this program between now and then. And so if you're eligible now, let's lock it in, let's go. And let's get that loan off your books. Because 24 weeks, if you have to wait 4 more months and all of a sudden, if the feds say, oh no, you can't even apply for forgiveness till the end of that period. And again, that's the biggest question mark I think left out there. Then you're going to, you're going to have to start paying interest on this. And then who's going to want to deal with it?
Right. Like you said, none of us want to get to December 31st and have a loan on the books. We want to take care of this. Yeah. So just to review what the pastor's salary includes: health insurance, pension, housing allowance, utility allowance. I think that covers it. Would you add anything else?
No, I don't know what else is customary, but
yeah.
But the housing allowance was something that got questioned early on. I think the federal government was pretty clear in its guidance at that. counted as compensation. That's part of your kind of salary compensation.
Mhm.
So.
Well, like I said, you all will have my email. It'll be emailed out to you. You can respond to some of these questions if you need to. I will also email a link to this recorded webinar. And so we want to be here to help in any way. And we'll also follow up with a little more information about the preschool teacher question too, and send that out.
Right, and I think there are a couple other questions that if we look at this, we may want to answer about the lease payments. You know, again, go back, clarify that.
Yeah.
Because as an eagle-eyed person said, you know, could include personal property, although that's generally not a big part of what they're intending. And I think they can restrict it. I mean, one of the things, I'll just give you an example of this, just to show you how you can get caught. When they issued the regs. When they issued the loans, you're allowed, if you're an owner who's also an employee, you pay yourself a W-2 wage of a private business, that you were allowed to borrow against the amount of your salary, your health insurance, and your retirement. But now the federal government has changed it, said, oh no, that health insurance and that retirement of an owner employee are not forgivable. So also there's a lot of owner employees going, ruh-roh, use technical term. So I would be careful on that. I think the real intent there was about real property. If you need the personal property to get there, we'll check on it. And then I think we'll get, so clearly the preschool employees will get to the date by which you have to ask for forgiveness. We'll double check that for you. And this question about personal employees.
Well, I know we didn't get to all the questions, and like I said, we will follow up, and we welcome you to also follow up with those questions. Dan, anything that you would add here?
So I would just say there's a question about if somebody just got a loan last Wednesday, the 8 weeks to assist the organization. So you would start on that date. So last Wednesday was whatever it was, the 17th. So it would go 8 weeks from there. And then after that, if you spent the money, if you got the loan, you can do it. So yeah, it starts on that actual date. That's right.
Yeah, and you choose 8 weeks or 24 weeks. Those are the only two choices.
Correct, right? I mean, now the question comes is what they wanted to do is give you more flexibility. Really, this was intended to solve the problem for businesses who thought, well, surely in 8 weeks, we're going to be back, right? By June 30th, in the middle of March, people thought, okay, by June 30th, surely this Corona will be part of our past and we'll all be back cooking the barbecue and everybody crowded in church and everything else. And that's not happening. Right? So I think they wanted to say it's like some of these businesses, is again, like gyms and bars and whatnot, I mean, aren't even allowed to open. And they may have taken out PPP loans in good faith, thinking they would be open, but they can't bring back their employees when there's nothing to do. So they're trying to give them more grace.
And I would think unless there's a strange circumstance, most of the churches will fall into 8 weeks.
I would think so. Because you were limited in the amount you could borrow by the 2.5 times payroll anyway. So.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge and letting us pick your brain too. This has been really helpful to take the time to do this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and Pam, just one more thing before I go. Yeah. And Pam, who's asked some great questions on here, as everybody is don't you have to wait? She asked, don't you have to wait for a bank to forgive us the forgiveness application? Look, if you're waiting for that, you're going to be waiting for Godot. So most of the time, they're not going to be proactive on that unless they're really well organized. So I would contact them if you're past your 8 week period and say, hey, do I just fill out this form that the federal government has provided, which you're going to have to do? Is there anything else I have to do? What do I have to do? So I would worry them a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead and approach them.
Yeah.
Very good.
Because if you wait on that, I mean, they should, but frankly, a lot of these banks are trying to figure out, like for instance, the bank I used, I asked them if they had submitted some applications just before I got on here for forgiveness. They said, yeah, we got them in, but we're still awaiting instructions from the federal government about how to do that. And this is a bank that did quite a few of these loans. It's not one of the, it's not like one of the major banks, but kind of a community bank. And so they're trying to figure it out too.
Right.
That may be why I haven't heard from them. Okay, take good care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you for all these good questions. Hope
Right, and if you
everybody-
could, excuse me, sorry. Heather, just if the ones who asked the questions about the preschools, if they could email those questions to you, that'd be great, just so we make sure we understand them correctly.
Very good. So you all have my email from the Zoom link that you received. You also will receive an email from me shortly. So you all should have my email. Very good.
Everybody,
Thank you all. Hope everybody has a good afternoon.
thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.